the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
AVWeek is produced and distributed through a partnership with AVNation and Rave Publications. For more information, go to ravepubs.com/AVNation. This is AV Week, episode 41, recorded Friday, May 11th, 2012. I have a multimeter, and I'm not afraid to use it.
Ready.
AV Week.
Performing scan.
Week.
Online.
This is AV Week. AV Week. It is time for AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. I am your host, Tim Albright. Thanks so much for joining us. This month, we're doing something kind of different in the land of AV Nation. Every week, leading up to InfoComm 2012 in the beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, we're going to highlight one of our monthly shows. And this month is one show that I kind of hold near and dear to my heart because, first of all, it's one that I host. And secondly, it's my wheelhouse. It's kind of where I live. It's the name of the show is EdTech. And EdTech is, as you might have guessed, and especially by the beautiful artwork that our buddy Matt D. Scott made for us. It has a little, the little graduation cap on it. That's the only way you know it's education. Focuses on the world of education and how the AV industry affects it. Education is one of the more stable, I guess, markets. If you talk to the guys that are on the other line, you might get some argument because of budgets and stuff like that. But
the market's stable. We're not.
Market's stable. We're not. That's it. So, but I have three very nice gentlemen, very much smarter than I am, and more well versed in this. This is why I have them on. I just ask them really silly questions, and they make me look smart. So. Let's go around the horn. Let's start from the West Coast just because you're the only one on the West Coast. And that is Greg Brown. He is from the University of Southern California, Los Angeles. How are you, sir?
Tim?
No, University of California.
Tim.
University
Tim.
of California,
Tim.
Los Angeles. Is that right?
UCLA.
Yeah, University of California.
UCLA. USC is like.
Never mind.
Our
UCLA, go
arch-nemesis.
Bears.
Exactly. Go Bears.
Go Bears.
And they're Bruins.
It's a bear. A bear is a Bruin, is it not?
By default, they're called the Bruins, and everybody here would argue with you, and I know there's no hope in.
There is no hope for me.
All right. Yes. Whatever you said.
UCLA. How about that? Let's make it simple. UCLA.
That would be me.
Okay. And then on the other side, completely, I'm the one stuck in the middle here. I'm from St. Louis. But we have Matthew Silverman from George Mason University. How are you, sir?
Good to be here. Thanks.
And since we're on, what again is George Mason's mascot?
We are the Patriots. It's
Patriots.
I guess a Muppet with a gun.
Oh, jeez.
I have
a musket. It's a Muppet with a musket. Keep
with a musket.
Keep
there
the alliteration going. And then far north of him, but still technically on the East Coast, Nova Scotia time. Oh, good Lord. I've already lost it. Is Scott Tyner from Bates College in Maine. How are you, brother?
I'm doing well, and contrary to popular belief, we are actually even part of the continental United States.
Technically, yes.
But opinions vary.
Not during daylight savings time. Don't you revert back to Canadian, monarchy or something?
No, we don't. But I can tell you that the sunrise is very early here.
I'm sure. And what is your mascot at Bates College?
We are still the Bobcats.
Bobcats. I was a Bobcat once. Cub Scouts, if you get that reference. Anyhow.
Oh, there you go.
So this week we're going to talk an awful lot about control because a lot of stuff came down this week about control, and it was really, really, really weird week for that. We're also going to talk about some stuff that some electricians are seemingly taking over CEDIA. At least that's what some people say. And one of the groups that kind of helps us out and helps us guys in education are lamp manufacturers, and one of them that is based here in the U.S. that I think is kind of cool to encourage people that have all their stuff in the U.S. They're having I guess a sale is the best way to put it. It's not commercial. It's just something, I think it's important to keep people that keep jobs in the U.S., up and employed. So we'll talk about that. But first, a very exciting thing for anybody and everybody who does anything associated with Crestron and Crestron DM, and that is the story that came down this week that I don't know if it was Patch Tuesday or what, but suddenly, seemingly out of the blue, magically, you only need one IP address for DM stuff. Matt, we'll start with you, and if you listen to the very first show, the very first title of the very first show of EdTech was Crestron Fanboy. There's a reason for that, because Matt and Scott and I are big Crestron houses. Greg is getting there because we're beating him monthly about it. But
resistance is futile.
I know. Assimilate. But Matt, let's start with you because you of the three of us, I think, have probably the biggest DM installation of the four of us. So talk about why this is important. Why did Crestron have to fix this? Why now? I mean, 6 months after the DMPS starts shipping and right before Infocom, is that why they're doing it, or they're doing it because this is just kind of when the engineers got done with it?
It's actually, I think it's when the engineers finally got it to where it needed to be. This is actually, as I understand, been in the pipeline for a while, maybe even as long as a year. It's really for a lot of places, particularly campuses. I'm not going to say just higher ed, but at corporate campuses as well. AV can still be the enemy on the network, and for people who were having problems getting IP allocations for their DM product. For example, you take a 16 by 16 or a 32 by 32 switch, and you get to the point where you need an IP for the switch itself, plus for every digital input card, and then for every room box connected to it. And I look at how we do allocations. I think for a 16 by 16, we block out 32 IP addresses in the VLAN for that building. I'm really fortunate. Our network engineering worked with us to develop a networking plan for this. However, talking to a lot of my colleagues in higher ed and even not in higher ed, most networking groups haven't been that nice. And if you can reduce your needs down to a single IP, it makes the networking group much, I guess, more open to allowing the device on their network rather than some of these devices, like I said, needing 32 or 64 or even more IP addresses.
Well, let me ask you this, because you have actually, I think all of you guys have some version of IT background. The way I see this is I'm kind of at the advantage. I don't. I sit in these rooms with these guys, with these IT guys, and I'm like, yeah, they're asking, well, how much bandwidth does this take, and security issues and security questions, and you said the magical word VLAN, which I still barely understand what that means. Is it the fact that maybe you've got the IT chops, and so they can talk to you one-on-one? Or is it just, hey, it's just one IP address, so it's all groovy now?
It's a little bit of both. First off, what we do today and what we're going to be doing over the next 5 to 10 years is IT. Yeah. All of our devices are moving on the network. We have to find a way to talk with them. I have an IT background, which goes back 10 to 15 years, but I've really been, I feel more of the AV profession, at least for the last 10. So I don't actually consider myself super up to date, but at least I'm conversant. What we were able to do is work with our, we express needs and work with our networking group to define a network architecture to support us. But there's a lot of networking groups that either don't have expertise or just don't have a trust factor, and I don't want to say it's specific to AV. They just don't like anything foreign on their network. And if you come to them and you say, hey, I'm deploying 20 DM rooms and I'm going to need 32 IPs per room, you'll probably hear a network director somewhere start choking. Whereas if you go to him and say, hey, I need 20 IPs, it's more manageable. And it at least lets them move in gradually into supporting AV on their network.
All right, Scott. So you're along the same lines as me when it comes to, we didn't have a whole lot, but we still had enough to where this is not only an issue for us, but also for guys who are going into corporations and businesses where a lot of times the IT guy is also the AV guy. So do you think that this is something that they had to do sooner rather than later?
Well, I think it's something that I think they had to change the way that they had implemented it. So I don't have much of an issue that every one of the receivers, for example, needs an IP address. That was never a problem with me. My problem was the way they implemented it, in that you need 25 consecutive IP addresses, and you just kind of got to block those off. And for the DMPS 300 in particular, you needed 3 consecutive ones, but they only had 1 MAC address to give you. And I think, like Matt said, when you start telling that to the network people, they're like, and understandably, they're like, wait a minute, something's going funky here. But I think that what Crestron didn't want to do it, or maybe what they were thinking in the future is, and I read this somewhere on one of the lists we're on, somebody compared this to essentially saying what Crestron's moving towards is all their equipments are encoders and decoders, and they're sending these digital encoded files everywhere. And so I can kind of envision the point where you're not necessarily running DM cable. Everything's literally over the internet. Everything's over the network. And I think that maybe that's where they were thinking, and they had to take a few steps back here because, like you said, I'm in an education institution, but I imagine if you go into a bank or into someplace like that, their network guys kind of flip out just as much when you kind of secretly need 24 consecutive IP addresses reserved for you, and you can't really tell them why. They kind of get a little nervous about that.
Well, you can, but sometimes they don't understand even when you do tell them. It's like,
well, and I think one of the other issues I think that Crestron was learning as they went along with this. I mean, I've got my DMCE, and it was news to me when all of this kind of started coming out on mail lists and the like, that this is how they were doing it. And when I called tech support, they couldn't exactly explain to me. For example, if I take a receiver and I put it in a boot P or a DHPC table, is it okay that it's not consecutive? They didn't really know. The answer is yes, because I'm doing it all over the campus.
Well, okay. So let's talk about that. You have your DMCE. I have not taken the time. I will admit, even though I have had much chiding from a very good friend of mine who actually happens to teach some of the courses.
And he was my teacher.
Well, I have my D, okay? Let's not say I'm not a complete slacker here. I have my D. And if you don't know what that means, it's the Digital Media Certified Designer. The DMC is the Digital Media Certified. The D is Designer. The E is Engineer. The T that they have is Technician. And not for nothing, the D is 1 day class, and you have to design something at the end. So I'm not as advanced as Mr. Tyner here, but I still have some understanding of this. But let's bring in Greg here, and Greg is, and just to kind of give some background, Greg is primarily an Extron house. Is that fair to say, Greg?
That's true, and we're trying to figure out how to roll out some Crestron equipment. And now my understanding with this was, they do want to suck up all these IP addresses. The previous workaround, if I understand it correctly, was to basically put your room behind a small managed switch, and let your switch handle all of the traffic between the switcher and all the various parts. We were looking at that. We've actually had some discussions with our IT folks about that. When we initially sent them that information, the first response was, clutching of chests and hard time breathing and stuff like that. But once they read through it and sort of understood that, okay, we're going to keep the one IP address for the room idea, they were kind of okay with, or a couple of IP addresses. We have a little bit of flexibility, but we We're literally scattered all over campus. We have 200 rooms in 22 different buildings. So I have one subnet in each building to play with, which is, which is a nice amount of flexibility, but it's a certain amount of flexibility. So the thing that I don't understand with this, and boy, Tim, I agree with you about hating press releases. I tried to find some more information on the Crestron site on just how exactly this works out and wasn't able to find anything. I understand how this would work on the DMMD equipment, which generally you can very easily get two Ethernet ports on there, but the darling here for many of us in higher ed, the DMPS 300, only has the one data port. Yeah. I don't understand how this idea transfers to that unit.
And see, I don't either. And that's the one thing that I'm not quite grasping my head around.
And that was the big thing that our network guys we got around it had an issue with is and I that's one of the things I called Crestron about is how do I need a MAC address, and they're like, oh no you don't, and I'm like, well, these guys are telling me I need a MAC address.
And, well, a good way to think about a lot of this stuff is your DM equipment is really one giant network switch from the sense of the network, and so it handles all the Ethernet traffic over DM cable or DMAG cable. And what you're dealing with is basically, rather than actually having a switch or a router there, your DM system is taking care of that. I think specifically with the DMPS, I remember reading something where even in the new private network mode, you actually need two outward IPs, one for the DM system and one for the processor, but I may be incorrect. We haven't had a chance to actually bench test any of this stuff yet.
I think you're right about that.
Two isn't a problem. 32 would be a problem.
Yes. Oh, well, no. Yeah. Understand that.
Well, let me ask you guys something that Scott kind of hinted to when he was talking about it, and that is the encoding and decoding part. This last year, a year ago, actually, at Infocom, I was looking at something. It wasn't from Cisco. It was from ClearSea, I think, where they were encoding and decoding at the site, and basically they were promoting a version of AVB before I really understood what AVB was. But basically, they're saying, the network is the switcher. The network is the new switcher. Mm-hmm. Is that what we're getting to here? Where really the network is the switch, and you're not going to have a 16 by 16 DM necessarily. You're going to have all these little itty bitty encoders at each. Every time you plug in a laptop, or every time you plug in a DVD, or let's say a Blu-ray player that has an HDMI connection. Matt, are we really just encoding and decoding, encoding at the source and decoding at the display?
Yeah. We really are. I mean, AVB is one of my favorite topics, and
and the more the more I learn, the more I like.
And it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years, but we'll get there. And the idea is it's kind of following just the general path of IT and a lot of proprietary stuff. At some point, AV will have to stop being proprietary in the sense of the switching. It's not that your endpoints won't add value. There'll be a lot to differentiate on the endpoint, and you'll have midpoints which process or switch or things like that. But we have a perfectly good high bandwidth transport, in many flavors of Ethernet. Yeah. So why not use it? Plus, all of us already have plant for that. You can run it between rooms, you can run it between buildings. With fiber, you can do some pretty amazing things.
And AVB is audio-video bridging for anybody who's sitting there confused listening to this.
Well, and that's the part that excites me. We've had CobraNet for years, right? And other versions of audio over, let's say, Twisted Pair or networking. You throw the video part in, and if you really want to get really crazy, you're also going to have the ability to do control. You're going to have to. I'm sorry, if you're going to do any of this, you're going to have control as well. You have the ability now to virtually do what years ago would have cost you, I'm not exaggerating here, I don't think, millions of dollars. And that's the ability to have one professor or one, let's say, presenter in the world of corporate, and send that to virtually anywhere on your network. That's pretty freaking cool.
Yep.
That's very cool.
And it's also it's a money saver. It really is, because let's say, okay, in St. Louis, which is roughly where I am, you got Andy Taylor, who I'm a hockey fan, so he's one of the new owners of the St. Louis Blues.
We're sorry.
You know what? Yeah, don't talk to me, LA boy. You guys played a much better game, a much better series than we ever dreamed of playing. So you had deserved that win.
So what you're saying is you choked, in other words.
Oh my gosh, yes. But Andy Taylor is one of the new owners of the Blues, and he in real life, in the real world, he's the chairman of Enterprise, not a small company. Okay, even in especially in St. Louis, which we don't have a whole lot of Fortune 500s, but even outside, Enterprise is a pretty good operation. He can sit in his office and do a presentation to the entire building virtually for the same price as he could do it in that room. Scott, that's pretty. The fact that we've gotten there and we've gotten there in 2012, that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is, and I think that is without question the way we're going. I know I don't know if other groups are doing it. My group is doing all the video streaming work now for Bates College, and here's, speaking of restaurant stuff, here's a little thing that I'm not sure if everybody noticed. In their latest firmware update of Capture HD, that device can now send a unicast.
Yes, that was a huge just stealth ad that they did in that last firmware.
Yeah, and so if you've got any type of, it can only send to 2 clients, but if you've got any type of a Wowza server or an outside CDN, all of a sudden you're actually putting encoders in your room and you don't even know it.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
That's really awesome. Yeah.
And Tim, I'm gonna send this to you after the show. There was a great 1-page article in this month's Commercial Integrator on AVB that does a very great high-level overview that we could post for our listeners
or our readers. Some people may read between the lines of what we say. So. All right, you're listening to AV Week. I swear it is. With my gang from EdTech, Scott Tyner, Matt Silverman, and Greg Brown, the wonderful LA Kings fan. This comes to us from the boys over at The Verge, who has a really actually cool-looking website. LG's Google TV is set to come to the U.S. this month. Google TV is not dead. And I am very thankful, at least. This comes to, was it Mr. The guy that runs, not runs, but the CEO, the chairman of the board. Good Lord, get my stuff right for Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt said, by the end of the year, Google TV will be everywhere. And this was around the same time that people were jumping off and dumping the actual device and the pass-through. Well, he obviously knew something that we didn't know, and that's the fact that a lot of people are starting to integrate them and integrate the Google TV stuff into the actual televisions. And this may be a play to kind of step in front of the rumored Apple TV. It may just be another evolution. But I think it's pretty cool when it comes to giving us more and more content inside our TVs and the whole streaming more and more content. Greg, is this something, and LG, by the way, said that Eric Schmidt said that the majority of sets sold by the end of the summer will have Google TV. Is this Google's, their next foray into, making the internet more ubiquitous? Or is it, or are they also maybe kind of trying to step in front of the quote unquote inevitable Apple TV?
I have no idea.
Well, there you go.
How's that for brilliant insight?
I love that.
I would love to. I want to see a review once they come out. What can you get on it? I mean, so many of these alternatives. I mean, I've just got. I don't really have regular TV. I have Uverse, so okay. I guess I'm sort of a little bit updated. But so many of these web-based alternatives, I've looked at a number of them, and it's like, okay, great, I can switch to this and get a quarter of what I currently have. Okay, the advantage of that is what exactly? So I'd be curious to see, what the implementation is. What can you get? How much is it going to cost you, after you buy the darn set? So that's sort of where I am. Maybe the other guys can bring more to this.
That's a fair question. Matt, I have an Apple TV and I have an Xbox, which both have some streaming things. I don't have a Roku, but I have played with them before. And so Greg makes up a good point. What does this thing do that the other ones don't do?
I'm with Greg. I've just never understood the concept of smart TVs. I mean, I think there's a place, for content delivery. I think that has a large place. But, the idea that you take a perfectly good content delivery device and create a perfectly horrible web browsing experience has just never sat well with me. Maybe I'm old school that I like my devices to be individualistic, but I don't know. I think the fact that it took this long for LG or anyone to bring a Google Smart TV to market, and I've never actually really heard anyone buy a TV just because it was a smart TV, speaks to the desire in the in the market, not necessarily the industry, but in the market for these products.
Well, let me ask you this, and Scott, will go with you and see if you get to hit the trifecta here. If you have 15 different devices and you only have 3 HDMI connectors, would this be a way to free some of those HDMI connectors maybe?
Well, I wonder if, and I don't know anybody else's age. At 38, and I'm getting gray hair on the side of my head, I actually think we're not the audience for this in the future, because I am like the other two guys, which is, my TV looks really good the way it is, and I'll go to Redbox and get a Blu-ray if I want to watch it. I've tried streaming. I signed up for Hulu Plus. I actually never canceled my account. I should. I've used it 3 times. And I love you. I've got the smart TV, and the first time I had it, I was like, "Oh my God, Google Maps! Oh, look at this! You can see my house." And I've never used it again. Oh, it's like I don't know. But I think that there's a completely different generation where my son will sit there with his iPod Touch and watch stuff on it. But see, and it's crap. Yeah. And he watches it.
You just hit the right point. Where's their target market? Maybe we're too old, but all the research on the 20-somethings and younger says they're not actually watching TV. Period. Yeah. They're watching content on their phones, their iPods, their iPads, which we'll generally agree is comparably crap, but that's their choice for content delivery.
Exactly, and the people that are buying TVs are people who are old enough to have their own places and TVs, and I don't know. They're not. I don't see how they're buying this. It doesn't. And I've also tried the streaming off the stuff. I don't know. Even for me, it's a pain to use. The biggest one that I'll use is on occasion I'll take my receiver and flip it over to Pandora if I'm just kind of hanging out around the house and want to hear something. Other than that, I don't use it.
And again, that's content delivery. And I'm not opposed to that or Netflix or Roku or anything like that, bundling that in. I'm just looking at the other 300 pieces of junk apps that they seem to bundle with these things.
Well, and you guys make a really, really good point, because my kids do the same. They'll sit on the couch across from me, and I'll be watching the big TV, and they would rather watch something on a mobile device, whether that was an iPod Touch or an iPad or something else. So yeah, maybe we are too old. I don't want to say that.
We've gotten a couple questions from students in our. We have a feedback email on information on the classrooms, and we've gotten a couple of why don't you have Apple TV in the classrooms or AirPlay in the classrooms?
Then that's content. I'm probably beating that one to death.
Well, no. But here's the thing, and as the AirPlay gets better, and I'll say that, and I don't want to get into a big Apple thing, but I will agree with those students, Greg, because I'm actually looking at doing an experiment this summer. An Apple TV is $100. I can afford out of my meager little budget $100. So I'm going to buy an Apple TV, and they the administration here at the college I work at have started to populate the administration at least with iPads, and I have one as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a specific classroom with someone who I know for a fact has an iPad, and they're going to get Keynote and they're going to get some other stuff, and we're going to see how it works for a semester or two. Dude, if I cannot pull a freaking HDMI cable again, I'm set. I'm on board. I mean, seriously, think about this for a second. You can give an instructor an iPad, and they can walk into the room, say, okay, this is the room I'm in, and I'm going to connect to this iPad, which is right next to the freaking projector, and it's jacked right in through HDMI, and you ain't got to worry about it. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you start putting in Apple TVs?
Well, I'll tell you why I wouldn't do it, and it's simply wireless. Anything we've ever done that relies on wireless or batteries, whether it's IR, RF, 802.11, whatever, there's always something that goes on with it. But I think that the concept of what you're saying is very similar to what we were just talking about with over the network, right? If we don't have to run all these wires and everything's just over the network, why wouldn't you do it? Yeah. The question is, what's that device that's out there that's going to solve that big problem for us?
The Apple TV.
Yeah. Different sides of the same coin.
No, yeah. I could be wrong, but like I said, I'm gonna at least take the fall and experiment with it and see how it works. It cost me $100 out of my budget. That's the extent of it. So I'll let you guys know in the fall or at the end of the fall how it works.
Well, it actually will be interesting
to us on that.
Yeah. It will be interesting to know, because I'm curious to know how obviously you've got your network guys on board right now, how they get around the non-routing issues.
Network guys? Who are they?
Have fun with that pilot then.
Yeah, my network guys don't listen to this show, so I'll say this: I don't generally contact my network guys. It's one of those ask forgiveness, don't seek permission.
That's usually the way to do it.
I mean, yeah, that's just that. I'll leave it at that. So, okay, moving on. I'm just going to get in trouble. This is from a website called smarthouse.com. One of the groups that is involved in our industry is a group called CEDIA. I'm not really explaining that to the audience. I'm more explaining that to the education guys. And I'm somewhat being flippant, but it's a group
it's an interesting show.
It is, and it's
a good show.
It's a group that we probably normally wouldn't go to because CEDIA is really about homes. It's the
residential stuff.
It's the resi stuff. But they are talking about the fact that electricians are taking over CEDIA, at least the show. Len Wallace, he's on the CEDIA board, and CEO of Len Wallace Audio, said the numbers of the CEDIA show are up, and yes, there is an increase in electricians attending the show. I suspect that they have moved into the specialist market because they have in the past worked alongside the traditional installer and believe they can do the same job. All four of us have dealt with integrators over the years. Scott, is this a good thing that electricians are moving into the integrator space, or is it a bad thing that they are?
Well, I don't see where it's a bad thing, and I say that, and I'm sure we'll hear differently from some other people, because they seem to be getting into it in the right way, which is they're getting involved with CEDIA. Hopefully they're taking courses and the like. It seems like part of a natural progression for an electric shop to move into this. And it just falls within that same thing that anybody would talk about, which is if they're trained right and if they actually understand what they're doing. When I read this, it reminded me of a conversation I had with an electrician that we had here running some wires for us, and they weren't doing any AV work. And he was talking to me about how he had gone into this place to do some electrical work, and this guy had this old Crestron system, and asked him if he could reconnect it and make his touch panel do it. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna get that all going up again." I'm like, okay.
Wow.
I mean, the guy didn't even know that you actually had to program the Crestron system. But why not? If they're going to, why not expand the industry? If they're going to take the right courses and understand it and be educated, then great.
As long as they all become DMCDs like Mr. Tyner, or DMCEs like Mr. Tyner.
Yeah, and and just start that whole list of acronyms after their names: GTS, DMCE, all the PMP, whatever all the other ones are.
Yeah. Matt, is this an issue for our industry, or is it also an issue for us as end users, for electricians, to start getting into the space that traditionally pure integrators have lived in?
Without knowing like the lay of the land, I think this was the CEDIA show in Australia. So yeah. I'm not sure how that relates to the U.S. But with things like NSCA, becoming part of the Infocom show and things like that, where it may have been a place where traditionally electrician who did a little bit of low volt may have rubbed elbows with AV. This may be kind of some of that evolution of the industry. I think right now, worldwide, everyone is looking for new business lines. Yeah. So this is, I think, one of the opportunities we have as an industry to, rather than kind of complain that the pie is being divided into more people, look at ways we can grow the pie and really say we can create more work. If we get more people involved, that's more exposure. We help them understand what AV is all about. So overall, I think more people being interested about AV is a good thing. However, given that AV is moving more towards IT, it may be a challenge for some folks.
So you're saying that it may not be the right time for electricians to start jumping in. It may be more of a time for IT guys to start jumping in.
Well, I think the IT guys have already jumped in.
Well, yeah, that's true.
But I think, as Scott said, it's helping them understand it's not just about running cables. And if they're willing to go through the education and know what they need to do to be successful in the industry, I think it's always great to grow the industry.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Greg, is this a good thing or necessarily?
Yeah, I think it's.
Go ahead.
Pie, the residential industry, and Lord knows a lot of electricians have been pretty thin on work here for a number of years, the way the economy has been in a lot of places. So I think it's an indication that resi is a relatively healthy and growing industry, and I also agree with Matt. I just hope that they know what they're doing. I mean, we have we have sort of an unclear delineation of who does what here on campus. And I know the electricians have gotten involved in some installs on campus, and I have found things like speakers and even saw an RS-232 line wired up once with 12-gauge THHN, the wire you would pull through conduit. And I'm like, man, I'm sure the gauge is efficient. This is impressive. So yeah, it's just a matter of I hope they get into it with some sense. I mean, certainly not the risk of hurting themselves that they see in their normal stuff. Most of our stuff is relatively innocuous voltage wise, but I hope it just doesn't introduce a bunch of crazy people who don't know what they're doing. I mean, certainly enough of the AV industry is that way already.
Hey,
I was gonna say we got 4 crazy people, right?
We know
what they're doing.
You know what?
We don't need any more.
I have a multimeter. I'm not afraid to use it.
Isn't there a song that goes that way?
I think so.
Not afraid to use it.
Good night.
On my first day of my first job getting out of the Navy was as an electronics technician, and I blew up my boss's multimeter on the first.
I blow one up every 3 or 4 days. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, except this was my boss's nice little pen multimeter, and it was my first day of work at that job.
Wow.
I welded it between 120 volts and ground.
That's when you just bring it back to him, Greg, and tell him he needs to get a better one next time. 'Cause this didn't stand up to the kind of work you're going to be
he was
doing.
watching.
No, this is what you do. You know what? In the Navy, we had much better ones than these.
Exactly.
Good point. I didn't think of that at the time.
In the Navy, I could do this all the time. What are you talking about? This is unnormal. This is abnormal.
Oh, wait, it's not a mil-spec multimeter. Okay.
Jeez. Well, actually, that's kind of funny because it leads us into our next one. There was a blog post by Lee DeStat, who I like a lot because he writes a really cool, just down to earth blog post. He's a blogger for rave publications, and he wrote one this week that got me thinking, and I was really glad that it was this week because I'm having you guys on. And if I wouldn't have used this story for AV Week, I was going to use it for EdTech. About what's in your bag, what's in your tool bag. And honestly, this is just a kitschy little thing that I want to go around. What's like 2 or 3 things that you have to have personally, like you, Matt, you, Scott, you, Greg, what do you have to have that is in your tool bag, and maybe like one thing that nobody would ever guess is in it? Greg, since we talked about you and your blowing up multimeters, we'll start with you.
Well, I would encourage everybody to go and look up this blog. It was a great list. And one of the things I think he missed on it was, give some thought to what you use to carry around stuff too. Mm-hmm. What I found that works really well for me is it's an open bag by a company called Bucket Boss. I think they started making these things you wrap around like the top of a 5-gallon bucket. Mm-hmm. But it's just this open top bag that I will carry around that, I can carry across campus really easily. It has a good shoulder strap on it, but I can also just sit it up on top of my bench here in the shop, and all of my stuff is right there close at hand. It also comes with came with a little multi-compartment plastic snap-close bin box thingy that I've just collected the little bits and pieces that I've had to use on projects here for the last year or two that I've had it, all the little nuts and bolts and adapters and things like that. Equipment-wise, some of the first things that I thought about were something I think we should all have are one of those little plug-in circuit testers here, going back to electricians. But, a little plug-in thing with the 3 little neon lights on the back end that tells you how often, somebody has reverse neutral and ground or something like that. I haven't seen my electricians do it, but on like work by, people renovating the building or something like that, we've a couple times caught things that were not wired correctly, which is kind of scary. Another useful thing, and this is something I pull out fairly regularly, sort of managing a small group here, is a level. I don't know how many people have people who work for them who just can't seem to use a level when they mount or hang something. It's kind of a novel concept.
I got to jump in right there. I actually once had to explain to a technician what a level was. So I really do appreciate that.
Oh, dear.
And they were hanging ATV and wondering why they were having a hard time getting it level. I said, well, there's this fantastic device, you may have heard of it, called a level.
No. Oh, jeez.
Yes.
I'm 20-something, right?
20-something, and I wish I could have made that one up, but it's true. That was an actual story.
There's an app for that. I've got it on my phone.
There are several apps for that, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I actually have a couple of those. But just briefly, the other 2 things I thought of were I love these little headlights that are in all the home improvement stores now, the little strap-based things that you can put on your forehead and have a light, shining where you're trying to work rather than doing the mag light in your teeth sort of thing. And the other thing that I have that we bought a couple years ago that was kind of we didn't know how often we would use it, but it's proven to be just invaluable, is a little laser measurer. It's made by Fluke. The one I have is a Fluke 411, and you just pull out this little yellow thing. It's like a tiny little multimeter. You press the button. Is the ceiling here, or how far is the throw here, or how wide is the screen? you could just instantly get all of those dimensions. Hugely useful tool. So those were just the first few that came to my mind.
Actually, you're right about the bag, and this is going to sound so weird. The bag that I use actually is my Extron bag that came with one of my compression tools. And you know what I'm talking about? I tried to buy one for my dad because he constantly keeps trying to steal mine. And I was told that they don't sell them individually. You have to buy the thing. So I went out to my integrator, and I personally, out of my pocket, purchased that was a $40 or $50 compression kit just so I could give my dad my Extron back. So
nice, there you go.
Matt or Scott, what is like one or two things that you have to have in your tool bag?
I'm just I'm sitting at my computer most of my time nowadays. So and actually I think that's part of it. It tells us where we are in this world. For me, my most important tools are my PC, the tools on my PC, and my iPad and the various tools I have on my iPad or my iPhone. Although I do have to agree with Greg's last statement about those laser measurers. If you get a good one, those are invaluable.
All right, Mr. Silverman, what is your one or two, besides the level, of course, your one or two tools that you have to have?
I'm actually with Scott. Actually, at this point, as a project manager, our techs kind of shoo me off the job site if I try to get involved. I'd say the couple things, I always have my laptop with me because if I'm going to do something on the side, it's usually looking into a program or a configuration. And then the other thing is a honest-to-God camera. Rather than a phone, because when I do assessments, I mean it's a Nikon. It has a decent optical and a zoom on it. It's nothing fancy. I've had it for a couple of years, but when I'm doing assessments on the front end of projects with the laser measurer that both guys have already talked about, I like to be able to take a good quality photograph on the front end. And I just hate camera phones for that. Again, like TVs, I like my devices to do one thing well.
Oh,
so
you're just an old, crotchety old man.
I know. I would have thought.
Get off of my lawn.
I thought you were the youngest of us all, but apparently you are.
I'm a young crotchety man.
Do you have a radio in your car, or do you expect it not to do that?
He has a crank on the front of his his Model T.
Yeah, there you go.
He brings a boombox in separately to his car because it can't be integrated.
Get off of my lawn.
All right. Well, Matt brought up the whole programming thing. Let's talk for a second, and just for a brief second, about control, shall we? There's a number of things here that we're going to talk about. First of all, AT&T and Microsoft both have kind of dipped their toe into the world of home automation, and the reason I bring this up is because that could very easily I can see mold its way into commercial, whether that's education or the boardroom. I mean, you've got the the president and CEO of Enterprise. This is he has AT&T control at his house, so why shouldn't he have it at the office? And then we're going to talk real briefly about a blog post that was on Rave. A young man asked a question, and I'm going to answer him in no uncertain terms. But Matt, is the fact that AT&T and Microsoft, God help us all, getting into control an issue, or is it great? They're expanding our horizons.
I kind of look at it as two different things. On the AT&T, this reminds me of whatever the security company that was about 3 months back got into it. AT&T is just trying to reach out, I think, and do more. And, I don't know. I think it may speak to, I think, two things in the resi market, not being in the resi market, but one, that most custom integrations are just way too expensive, and that this, by bringing some standardization, this may bring down the price or encourage more people to do it. It also allows them to package stuff. On the Microsoft side, it really reminded me of the Android at Home initiative. We all remember that announcement?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And, I see that and I'm like, well, I think there's a market. I mean, there's a lot more do-it-yourselfers, and something I think I sent out to you guys, and I think we're going to post with the episode. But there was this great video of this kid from Berkeley, I believe, who automated his dorm room, and it was actually using X10 product out of everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it just to me kind of showed what I'll say a democratization of some of control. I mean, control historically has been, Crestron, AMXs, you need to learn a whole new programming language. You need to learn a whole new way to think to do control properly. And we're having more and more people in this hacker space and more people who are growing up digital who just wonder why should it be this hard. And I think that's what we're seeing with the Microsoft, the Android at home. AT&T, that in my opinion, I think is they're just trying to get a new line of business. But it just shows a desire and a willingness, I think, from residential, folks to have a more degree of automation and have their entire life wired. So I think that's what we're seeing with both of these announcements.
Would you agree with that, Mr. Tyner, there, that it's just them kind of, getting into what's already existing with the hacker mentality?
I think so. I do think it's wonderful that our resident old grump Matthew has such a wonderful view of where this is going to go. I mean, I looked at it and the first thing I said is, oh, so Microsoft is going to make something that's cheap, reliable, and effective. I believe it. And the other thing I thought of when we saw the video of Brad was how many times did this kid film this thing and it not work before he pieced together a 3-minute video of all of this working. And I think that's the thing. The video for the Microsoft research I think was the same thing. First of all, there's this 20-something-year-old telling us all how easy it is as he presses 4 or 5 different buttons and goes through screens on his phone. Let's get personal. My wife, who's really very smart, would have quit doing that, after having seen what that guy did. And, the idea that the real kind of Pollyanna view here is that all of the manufacturers would come to some agreement on standards and how things communicate. And until you've done that, as we know, having done any programming for any control system, you need different drivers for different devices, even within the same manufacturer. And so it's more than just saying, let's give you a cheap application on your phone. You need more than that. And so, I'll be the resident grump now and say, I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, and Greg, actually, Scott raises a point that leads us into our blog post by a guy by the name of John Chichla, I think. He's a rave pub blogger, and he asked the question, can't we just put buttons for every available function on the touch panel? I'm going to be the angry guy and say, no, you can't. That's why it's called an automation system. Greg Scott mentions that the fact that his wife would have quit after 3 or 4 pages, and wait, regardless of whether it's AT&T or Microsoft, we need to keep in mind the fact of whether it's Infocom's, dashboard for controls, which if you don't know what that is, I'll put a link up for. It's a great little blueprint that says, hey, you know what? Let's make things simple for the end user. And you know what, guys? We're not the end users. In our world, the professors are. The IT guys and the AV guys on corporate levels aren't the end user. The CEO is. And the end users at home isn't, necessarily the tech-savvy kids. It's mom and dad. So, Greg, don't we need to keep this as simple as possible?
Oh, I have...
Mr. Extron?
Well, I was going straight to a Crestron example on this. We have our one Crestron system, which is in a departmental room, and which we commissioned probably about a year ago, and uses their TPM-C8, the little wireless touch panel, and the layout and the pages and the buttons, the whole structure of the interface has been an ongoing work by a group of my esteemed colleagues over the last year or so, the programming being done by an outside company. And boy, if ever you want to test your sanity, that would probably be a really good project, a sort of group work by a bunch of people who, they're very knowledgeable in their own particular areas of skill. Unfortunately, touch panel layout and interface and user interface is not one of them. And it's just been this maddening ongoing project for the last year. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand, what's pay no attention to the guy behind the curtain, and a lot of people don't understand what's involved there. Jumping back to the dorm room there, the Brad with the guy doing everything on his touch panel, I sort of had flashes of what's the I think it's the meme now that people are doing where you have the what people think my job is like sort of thing. And that was sort of the flash of inspiration I had at that moment, was that, hey, here's what he thinks is all that's involved in this stuff. You just go right on ahead with that delusion.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you one thing that kid really did right, which is that he set Justin Bieber to wake him up. Because if anything's going to get you out of bed to go turn that radio off, it's Justin Bieber singing. My buzzer can go off for 15 minutes and it doesn't bother me. If I hear Baby Baby, I'm getting up to turn it off.
That's a good point.
Scott, I'm kind of guessing that the rest of us didn't realize that was a Justin Bieber song.
Well, how many of you have got a 9-year-old and 11-year-old?
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old, and I unfortunately know who the young punk is, so who keeps getting on my lawn. So, Matt, is this? We do. I mean, and you're heavily involved in the restaurant owners group, and this has got to be something that is talked about there, and in other places as well, where we talk about control and making it ubiquitous for everybody.
Yeah, I think if there's anything we could all strive to try to help the industry grow over the next couple of years is really thinking about control design, UI design, and designing for the users. And that doesn't necessarily mean involving the users in the conversation.
Very well done.
I mean, we do design documents for every UI we do here at George Mason. And what I found over time is I get the functional requirements from the user. And then I'll sit down and I'll mock something up. And I'll say, does this look good? And get some feedback. And we'll probably do 2 or 3 iterations before we actually commit to graphic design and programming. And from there, we kind of have adopted the approach of tell us what doesn't work for you, rather than tell us what you think will work. Yeah. And I'm a huge fan of minimalist. I did try a round of rooms where we did nothing but buttons, and it was great from a functional point of view, but it just lacked in feedback. And people today, because of your iPhone, really expect a lot of feedback. So we've started going with the smallest panels that our systems will allow. So I'm a huge fan of the minimalist approach to keep it functional, and you should absolutely not give the user a button to do everything. We were actually just having this conversation today about DVD players and what controls we should give them. And my personal feeling is if they're doing anything much more than pause, play, stop, or chapter forward, we should hand them a remote and say, you know what, you're an advanced user.
Yep.
And you're not defeating the system, but 95% of our users only need those features. So design for the majority, not for that one super user.
That makes sense. That makes it. Yeah, make it as overarching as possible, and then you are going to have those super users that need every available function. So
I'm personally a fan of the touch panels that have an exact replica of the remote control.
They have every available function.
Yeah, no, it looks exactly like the remote control.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen those?
Yes.
Yeah, they're fantastic. because it was like
some of the new remotes are just crazy.
We're gonna have to have a talk in Vegas, Mr. Tyner.
No, this is all in sarcasm, of course. I think it's like this.
I know
the confusion that this remote caused. I want to just take it a step extra and cause you even more confusion.
So not only is it not the remote, it's a picture of the remote.
Yeah, exactly.
With all the available functions, even though you don't know what they all do.
And then you figure out how to hold two buttons down at the same time.
Yeah.
This is one thing that we really liked about our Extron equipment. We have a lot of their MediaLink controllers, and one of the things that's available for them are these little auxiliary button panels, one of which is a combination VCR DVD controller, which with like 11 or a dozen well-labeled buttons that give you all of the basic controls you could want for a VCR or a DVD, and hook that up to a flasher, program everything, and everyone's happy, and it works really well.
Well, I think it is what the 226 controller, and I know they have some add-ons to that. I consider that to be actually one of the high points in AV interface design. That is a phenomenally good design for higher education, and just shows how simplicity can work.
Yep.
We switched to that back. I don't know when that came out. Probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. Because we were really behind in equipping all of our rooms. We have the better part of 200 rooms, and we put that across all of our classrooms. I mean, I literally have that in rooms stretching from 11 all the way up to, I think our biggest room is 419.
Wow.
With that single controller. Yeah, it's a little too little right now, which is why we're looking at some of our other alternatives. But, it's a very simple, robust system, and that's the way we were able to build out all of the rooms the way we have, doing it in-house the way we do it.
Wow, that's really cool. All right, gentlemen, that is going to be it for us today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, we have brought in the guys, the gang from another show just to host this week's episode of AV Week to give you a taste of what we are like. This is the gang from EdTech. The last gentleman there is Greg Brown from UCLA. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Always a pleasure.
Also with us from the great Northeast, Scott Tyner from Bates College up in Maine. Thank you, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always the highlight of my day.
And from due east of me, from George Mason University, Mr. Matthew Silverman. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
My name is Tim Albright. Thanks so much for joining us for shows like this and others. Please go to the website ravepubs.com/AVNation, ravepubs.com/AVNation. That's all the time we have for AV Week.